Howdy, y'all. I am Paul Thompson, and this is my Project Hell, where for the next 20 minutes, Kelly and I are going to throw out the corporate lingo and try to talk some no-nonsense project management that helps everyone here solve some real project problems.
And I'm Kelly Schockler, and today we have a couple of what we think are engaging points of interest for this session of my Project Hell. We have our usual hot topic, and we're hopeful and almost sure that you're going to find something useful to take away and apply to your own project management practice. And then we're going to head into the Coach's Corner with today's brave project manager guest, who's we're going to partner with together to find solutions for their project hell situation. Now, some of you are live today. So if that's you, we encourage you to use the chat feature when you want to share your own experience or encouragement or advice. We welcome you to chime in anytime. Paul and I are going to have an eye on that. Or maybe you're tuning in via our YouTube channel. And if that's you, we welcome you to drop us an email with any of your questions at myprojecthell@gmail.com. Now with that, Paul, you have a catcher's glove because I'm lobbing the hot topic intro right over to you.
Nice. All right. So today's hot topic is starting a project, right? How do you do it right? What do you need to do? And I would argue that it's never too early to make a first impression. Project owners are forming an impression about how you're going to work out, how much they're going to have to manage you, and whether or not they can just trust your judgment about the project issues, right? Team members are deciding if you're going to help them or be a hindrance to the work they have to do on the project, and how much overhead you're going to add to their workload. Now, all of this is based on how you start your project, and it's probably not fair, but it is very true. So Kelly, how do you start projects and get them kicked off correctly?
Well, yeah, it's not fair, first impressions, but
Right?
nonetheless, those cognitive biases are in there. And, maybe there's been some rumors going around prior to your coming on. Your street cred went before you, right? But so when I'm starting a project, call me unconventional, Paul, but I love the start of projects. It's one of my favorite project phases. Figuring out, as you said, who's who in the zoo, sorting through the big ball of messy yarn, finding out where the ends are to identify scope, forming the project team. I love that stuff. But if I'm thinking about one of the best practices to begin with, I'd have to say it's focusing on interviewing your key stakeholders. And that's part of making that first impression, that you mentioned, the meet and greets. And it's also where you're observing and you're listening to what your key stakeholders are saying. And I'll tell you what, it takes great discipline, at least for me, to do this, because as PMs, we love to just dive in and start going 100 miles an hour. Let's organize this thing. Let's get going. Because usually when a project's starting, the fire is lit, right? However, one of the greatest ROIs I've had in my project is the time that I've spent actively listening to those key stakeholders during the meet and greets, the interviews at the beginning of the project, because you can get amazing insights that are going to carry you through your planning and execution just by asking the right questions and listening. So that's one thing I thought of. And I'm wondering, what, besides making the first impression, what else is on your list of best practices for starting projects?
So the timing of this was really interesting, because I just last week had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she's a PM. She had been in consulting organizations for 15 years. And she took a new role in an organization that non-consulting, right? So she's an FTE there and everything. And when she went to go start a project, she was a little flabbergasted by the things that were missing, right? She went to her boss and she's going, so normally I had an SOW that gave me scope and everything. What do we have? And came back like, yeah, those would be good ideas to get down, right? And you guys, we've talked about this. So, vendors call it an SOW. We would call it a project charter. But that's where you really can write down the scope and set your boundaries, right? What's in and what's out. The other thing she asked about that was just standard fare were kickoff meetings, right? Because that sort of sets the
Mm-hmm.
tone and gets everybody like, okay,
Yeah.
we're going to start now, right? And again, that was something that as a non-consulting firm, they didn't do because it's just not in the DNA. And then finally, the other piece she was really surprised about that I find just incredibly helpful was standing up your governance up front, right? And it's twofold, right? How is senior leadership going to support you? But also, how are you going to manage up, right? So how are you going to pass information? How are you going to keep them fed and kind of out of the weeds, right? Because it's just as complicated when senior leadership starts to be calling your engineers on the team or, SMEs and asking for updates. So you kind of got to get all those things up front. But if you do, that does set the tone and sort of the things that a lot of times a vendor brings in that I don't think all the companies have caught up to.
Yeah, kind of that low project management organizational maturity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you mentioned the kickoff meeting. That's where you're starting to build that trust with your
Right.
team and all the team norms. There was another thing though that I thought about when I was thinking about this. This is unconventional for sure to think about this, I think, but in the early stages of your project, organizing pause and reflections in your week so that you as a PM have time to be brainstorming just internally with yourself, and ideas and connections between ideas and ahas can surface. So there's this book that I want to mention by Kevin Cashman. It's called The Pause Principle, Step Back to Lead Forward. This is an excellent resource to learn more about the art of taking pauses and the idea of making space to think. And what Cashman talks about, is how our current culture suffers from what he calls hurry sickness. We're filling all of our available space with transactional behavior, doing, checking off our to-do items on our list, which, by the way, fun fact, our endorphins peak when we check off items on our to-do list. There's a physical payoff when we do that, which I thought that was fascinating because I that's probably why I love checking things off. I'm getting an endorphin rush I didn't realize. But really, your best ideas come from when you've created the time and the space to let your mind wander, not when you're overloaded and anxious and multitasking, and you've got to build that in ahead of time. And this is especially important when there's a high degree of complexity in your projects. And because converting complexity and ambiguity into tangibles takes a lot of energy to sort through and to be able to ideate on. So that was one thing that I had thought of.
I
Do you
like
find
that.
that to be true, Paul?
I like that, and it gets you out of that hurry up and wait state, right? Where rush, 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 and then you find out you're just sitting around and this even it out, plan your thought periods. It's a clever approach to it. Nice.
Yeah. So a few things to think about here on this hot topic and best practices in starting your projects, making that first impression, having stakeholder interviews with your key stakeholders and really listening to what's being said, identifying scope, kickoff meeting, and learning, planning what your governance is going to be, and then making space for yourself as the PM to take pauses and thinking time, as I like to call it. So let's move on to Coach's Corner, shall we?
Sounds good.
All right. We're going to troubleshoot a little Project Hell situation with our guest PM, and joining us today is Dan. Welcome, Dan. Dan's an IT business analyst and a PM with experience in aerospace, avionics, supply chain, finance, just to name a few of the hats he's worn. Welcome to my Project Hell, Dan. We're glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Dan, welcome.
Yeah.
Howdy.
So do tell, what is your Project Hell situation you're facing right now, Dan?
Well, it's funny enough that what the situation I'm going to offer segues nicely from what you guys described as an intro into projects and going here. So right now, I am heading up in my volunteer hours in the VP of programs for Puget Sound Chapter Project Management Institute. And I am confronted with a situation in which I have an organization of project managers that want very much to be project managers, but the situation calls for them to be executives. And it's this weird dynamic where I am the VP, I've appointed 3 directors, I'm training my directors, and we're bringing a very, diligent, metric-driven project management approach to everything, agile, yes, waterfall, yes, all of this, yes. And we're completely missing the personal element in all of it. And so I have to sit there and go, wait a minute, when I look through the PMBOK and I look through all of my materials, I mean, we're doing everything by the book. So what's the problem? Well, then my executive coach is saying, you're not being an executive. And come to find out, there's a different skill set for being an executive as opposed to being a project manager. But I'm a project manager. How do I bridge this gap? It's kind of an esoteric question, but it does become more important as you get to mid and late career. And funny enough, both of you are business owners and executives. So both of you have fabulous expertise in this. So that is the problem I'm posing to both of you. How do I bridge this gap? How do I be simultaneously a good executive and a good project manager, and then teach my underlings how to do the same thing and know when to do it?
So it sounds like you're talking too about strategic leadership versus that tactical execution. Is that true?
That would, yes, that is.
And do you have some specific skills that you're thinking about that, or it's a blank slate right now as far as executive versus PM level?
Right now, we're just coming out of the blank slate part where both myself and my team, we're realizing that, hey, we can't apply metrics to this. We're doing our weekly scrums. We've got our agile principles in place, but it's motivating, and getting people to engage, and it's all volunteer work. So, nobody's getting paid for it, but we're finding that in and of itself, being a project manager, it's the focus is very metric driven and systemic driven, but people, are irrational beings, and they are, and
noticed.
Right. And so what I'm encountering is there is a certain point in running an organization at which project management kind of stalls out, and I'm sitting here going, I need to take my people to the next level, but I can't necessarily say, okay, let's apply metrics to all of this and govern by the metrics. It's a different skill set. It's inspiring people. It's being able to sit back and take the bigger picture and saying, okay, yes, all these metrics say this, but I have this bigger picture. And then I'm sitting here going, wow, all of a sudden I've hit the gap between project manager and sponsor.
Okay.
And I'm going, how do I bridge this? And not only how do I bridge this, but how do I train the people under me to view my example and take the lessons from me? Like, what should I bear in mind with this? And again, the PMP doesn't, the PMP exam doesn't, prepare you for this. This is
it does not
on the job. Like, wow,
if it did, it'd be a lot more popular, I think.
Right.
But, so Paul, let's break this up into 2 maybe sections. Wait, the first is you, because nothing can really happen if it doesn't happen with you first, right?
So that's a good point, right? Gosh, Dan.
It's a difficult one, but it's very real. Also, forgive my cat in the background.
I do like this one because it speaks to one of the reasons I love project management, right? We have to develop some very elastic skills. Sometimes we need to bring to the table part salesperson, part taskmaster. The other times it's part fortune teller and part den mother, right? We have to pull from a lot of skills. And I think you talked about it, right? The PMBOK has some very specific skills it teaches and kind of very hard, I wouldn't say easy, but they're very measurable, right? Doing a budget is a task item that you can learn just by filling in numbers. Whereas, influencing stakeholders, that's a little more nebulous, right? So one of the things that I always try to tell all of my PMs on my projects, and this is where whether they're coordinators or seniors, right, is think like your customer and think like the stakeholders you're addressing, right? So the first thing we tell everybody is know your audience, because if you go and tell a manager there's going to be a schedule delay, they go off to thinking, I've got staffing problems that I now have to deal with because this is going to go over and the 2 people that I had assigned are going to go long. You tell accounting the same thing, and they're already running over to see their budget items. How is an overrun going to hit this quarter's financials? And the CIO is thinking, right, is this project going to be relevant if you guys go another 6 months long? How come I don't have a self-correcting governance program? And do I just have the wrong project management discipline in place? What's up? So all of those are where, as a PM, I need to start thinking about, right? So when I do communications and status, I need to be thinking, am I writing to another project manager? No, because nobody likes hearing about schedules but us. So how do I communicate that to the managers, the accountants, the CIO? How do I identify risk and mitigation plans from their perspective, right? Because, there's a risk that the budget might go over means something completely different to everybody. But if you don't think like them, you don't really capture it and it doesn't speak to them. And you kind of got to get into a marketing setup. One of the things we do is we market our programs to the stakeholders. There's a conscious effort of how we communicate, how we advertise to them. Hey, we're coming to your town. This is what we're going to be doing in your particular department, right? And you kind of have to sell it all along the way. And that's starting to build all those various muscles of part salesman, part taskmaster, fortune teller, den mother. So I'm going to stop there because I think I've thrown a lot out, and I know Kelly can build off of that and add better context. So I'm going to step back and let her take over for a few minutes while you can.
Thank you.
You can.
Thank you, sir. So first, you're talking about a volunteer effort, right? So
Yes.
I love that you care about your volunteer team and you want to help them rise up into excellence, and you want that for yourself too. And so, a few minutes ago, I just said, well, you need to figure out where you're at before you can help them. I'm taking that back because I'm thinking about the volunteer camaraderie that you have. And I think what might be a good experiment is to do a brainstorm session together as a team, so you can get all of their perspectives and input on what they think it means to be a leader in their projects. Because this is where you're going to be able to see exactly how each team member is thinking, where their own gaps might be, how they view project leadership. You'll be taking in your own personal assessments too, I'm sure. But by brainstorming together and getting the definition of what strategic project leadership and behavior looks like, you're getting buy-in from them on what it means and what the difference is between being that and being a tactical executor. It's not you telling them, hey, here's what this is what you need to do. You're not the sole subject matter expert on this. You're building a definition together and you're guiding them in that. And then I think once you've got your definition, your common meaning and definition of what project leadership excellence or executive skills are, then it's time to see, okay, where are their gaps? And they need to figure that out, right? They might need some coaching, but let them self-assess first. Where do they think their gaps are? The worst thing is when someone comes up to you unsolicited and says, hey, you had a gap here, you need to go fill that. It's not assimilated very well, right? But where do you think your gaps are? How might you close those gaps? You're just facilitating their thinking and you're assisting in the unfolding of their awareness. So, and also, I don't know, because it volunteer run, and is there any budget or organizational commitment for helping train people? Maybe you could bring in an internal trainer for the team to do some training and coaching on the skill sets that were identified, and to help up level their skill set, both as a team and individuals. No, just something I was thinking about. I find that team building that way and having team brainstorming helps. It creates a atmosphere of vulnerability and trust and common vision and definition.
Okay.
Paul, I
So
want to add something on there.
yeah, that's good. I like that, right? Ask people what they see they're missing. I'm going to give you a method that I like to use, 5 why method. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh yeah.
You know, why is it important?
Mhm.
I will tell you how not to phrase that is I don't care. I've used that term for why is it important, and the two have different are received completely different. But really, that's what you're driving to, right?
Mhm.
Get these people to think, why is that important? Because it helps us get crystal clear on what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to measure, where we're trying to go with things. And it, for those not familiar with it, asking that 5 why question 5 times kind of eventually gets you to there's the root of what you need to deal with. So I would encourage you to use that. We use it a lot of times when we're trying to figure out different things on projects or communications, things like that. Why is it important? Why do they care? Why is that important? So that might be a way of kind of getting the team to sort of think about things on their own, that 5 why method.
Yeah, I can use that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything here that resonates today?
Yeah, just having the team members identify where they think their own weaknesses are. I think that would be really, really helpful, because I need to get people to start thinking away from terms of metrics. There's this tendency for new project managers and project managers early in the field to just quantify everything, just everything. And any problem can be solved with appropriate adherence to metrics and systems. And yes, that's true to a point. And beyond that, when do you start developing the people skills, the qualitative stuff, the intangible things, and really building their confidence to be able to step out beyond the metrics and say, data does not have to drive all of your decisions, nor does data need to be your shield between you and the world, or you and a program management review, because the executives that are talking to you about the status of your project, they're just as interested in how you are managing and what your relationship is with your team as the metrics and everything going on. So just trying to build their confidence. And I really like that idea of saying, hey, what do you guys think you need to work on? And then see what their answers are.
Cool. And we're going to help you.
Okay.
So just happens that Kelly and I put together a self-assessment tool.
Yeah.
You can download that from My Project Help, big button, free download right on the front page. Absolutely free. No, give me your email, firstborn naming rights to your child or anything like that. But it's going to go through 30 some different
Competencies.
competencies, and have them rate themselves. It'll help them see where the deficiencies are, and it lets them kind of balance it against, I'm a starting project manager, I'm a senior project manager, and it has industry experts kind of say, here's where you should be. So give that a try, and I think that will be a good first step to getting them to open their eyes to where their blind spots might be.
I love it. I will definitely use that with the team.
All right.
Cool.
Well,
Our
that
20
puts
minutes.
us 4 minutes over. This has been fun. Way
It
too much
has.
fun.
And it's time to let everyone get back to their projects. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today live, and also those of you who found us on YouTube and decided to give us a listen. And there's a post-show email for those of you who have registered for My Project Hell coming your way, and you'll find details on how to connect with Paul and I for some free problem-solving time.
And I hope you guys did enjoy the show. I know Kelly and I had a great time putting it together and spending this time with you. We kind of have a little surprise for next time, a special two-part program from what we presented at the Puget Sound's PMI chapter. So you'll get to hear our conversation. And sure enough, it is on assessing your skills and knowing what you need to do in order to take yourself to the next level in the modern era. So as Kelly said, you're going to get a survey coming out. Please fill it out. We really appreciate the lessons learned for us. And if you want to participate in My Project Hell, drop us a note at myprojecthell@gmail.com. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you, Dan, for being in Coach's Corner. See you next time.